The star cruiser Orion shuddered, its engines screaming a symphony of failing systems. Alex, strapped into the pilot's seat, braced for impact. Warnings painted his cockpit bloody red, the proximity alert a banshee wail. It had been a milk run, a routine scouting mission to chart a lifeless, resource-rich asteroid belt. Or so they thought. Now, yanked from hyperspace by an unknown gravitational anomaly, hurtling towards a planet that sensors couldn't even classify, this was so far beyond standard operating procedure it made his head spin. When the Orion's hull finally met the atmosphere, it was a cacophony of ripping metal and shattering glass. Alex's world became a blur of fire and flailing limbs. Then, blessed darkness. He came to in fits, coughing up mouthfuls of ash. Systems screamed offline somewhere nearby. Pain, dull at first, then sharp as white-hot splinters, bloomed across his body. He was alive, that much was obvious. He was alone, probably, and was most definitely not where he belonged. Alex pried his eyes open. Twisted metal beams of the Orion's remains cast strange, elongated shadows in what passed for daylight. A sickly yellow sun barely pierced a haze of what looked disconcertingly like smog. Off to his right, a verdant expanse stretched towards a horizon lined with jagged rock formations. Jungle, maybe? It was dense, too dense to see much of anything. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision, just a flicker. Whatever was out there, it was watching him. He forced himself upright, wincing at the flare of protesting muscles. His survival pack had miraculously cushioned some of the impact. Medkit, field rations, and his trusty pulse rifle secured with a magnetic latch on his hip, intact, at least. One less thing to worry about amidst the sea of unknowns. No time to unpack the how and the why of this disaster. Alex knew the drill. Assess, adapt, survive. First order of business, find a defensible position. The wreckage of the Orion wasn't it. Exposed. Too many potential sight lines obscured by the deformed superstructure. He hobbled towards the tree line, every muscle on fire. His eyes darted about, seeking threats within the alien foliage. With no intel on local flora and fauna, the rule was simple. Assume everything is out to kill you. He couldn't shake the feeling he wasn't alone. A noise, low and guttural, made him freeze. Something big moved amidst the ferns, the vibrant green fronds trembling in its wake. Alex slowly lowered himself to a crouch, pulse rifle sliding off his hip and into his waiting hands. Decades of combat training kicked in, muscle memory taking over. The creature exploded from the foliage, a grotesque quadruped all muscle and teeth. Dull brown hide hung loosely over a bulbous body and a head that was all snapping jaws. Alex fired on instinct, pulse blast searing the air with the smell of ozone. The impact threw the beast backwards, but didn't kill it. It screeched, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound, and contorted its body, preparing for another charge. 2 more bursts from Alex's rifle finally silenced the thing. He stood, breath ragged in his chest, staring down at the twitching corpse. So, not bulletproof. Good to know. His heart thundered in his ears, the adrenaline rush finally subsiding. First blood. His. He scanned the tree line again. Nothing. For now. But after that howl, there was no way he was alone out here. Alex hefted his rifle, a grim determination settling over him. Whatever this planet had in store, he'd fight. If there was one thing Alex was good at, one thing that had kept him alive for this long, it was outlasting the bastards that wanted him dead. Alex took a precious moment to examine the carcass. Thick hide, dense muscle, and a mouth ringed with teeth meant for tearing, not chewing. A carnivore, and a big one. Not the apex predator, he suspected. No, that probably belonged to whatever had made that blood-curdling howl. But this thing had been ambush hunting, a testament to the lethal efficiency of this alien ecosystem. He needed cover, and he needed it fast. The dense vegetation was an unreliable defense. Too many shadows, too many places for things to hide. He made a break for the rocky crags, scrambling over roots and loose soil, his battered body screaming protest. The first outcropping of stone offered some respite. Large, angular boulders piled atop one another, creating natural alcoves and narrow crevasses. Imperfect, but better than nothing. Alex clambered up, choosing a spot with a view back towards the tree line and a narrow entry point he could easily defend. He took stock, forcing down the rising panic. Rations, check. Ammunition, enough, but not unlimited. His medkit had taken some damage. He'd have to be sparing with his stims. He pulled a handheld scanner from his pack. Useless. It wasn't registering any known life forms or energy signatures. Whatever had pulled the Orion out of hyperspace had scrambled long-range comms too. Great. Completely cut off and blind. A snap of a twig made Alex whirl, rifle raised. Nothing. Just the wind rustling dry leaves somewhere below. Or maybe not. His instincts honed over the years in some of the galaxy's worst hellholes were screaming at him. He wasn't alone. As if on cue, a cacophony of screeches and growls erupted from the tree line. Not one predator this time. A pack. The gleam of too many eyes reflected the sickly sunlight filtering through the thick canopy. Alex counted at least 5 of those hulking brown monstrosities circling the base of the rocks, sniffing the air. Hunger gleamed in their eyes. They seemed to know exactly where he was, the cowards. Circling, assessing, not quite daring to charge. They'd learned from their fallen comrade, it seemed. Bulletproof they weren't. But smart? Maybe too smart for his liking. He couldn't stay here. This was a siege, and he wasn't built for those. He'd have to force their hands, and his options were limited. Distraction? Too open. One misstep and he'd be shredded. Then it clicked. He checked the integrity of his pulse rifle and then, with practiced ease, ejected the spent energy cell and reached for a spare. He fiddled with it until he deliberately triggered the overload protocol. It began to whine, pulse with a dangerous, unstable rhythm. His homemade grenade. Alex stood, feigning bravado he didn't feel, and lobbed the sizzling energy cell towards the largest of the creatures. At the last moment, they scattered, but it was too late. The cell detonated in a shower of scorching sparks, and a collective shriek pierced the air, a mix of fury and pain. His chance. Alex sprinted across the rocks, ignoring the stabs of pain in his leg. The howls followed, a disorienting symphony, but he kept moving. He wasn't looking for cover. He needed the opposite, an open field, a place where he could see them coming. A sudden drop almost sent him tumbling. He skidded to a halt, peering over the edge of a sheer cliff. A river snaked through the valley below, wide and glistening. A gamble, but he didn't have many plays left. First the rifle, then his pack. He tossed them over the edge with practiced aim, wincing as they disappeared into the rushing water below. One last look back at the tree line, at the glowing eyes, and Alex took a running leap. The wind whipped past his ears as he fell, and then the shocking cold of the river as it swallowed him whole. He resurfaced, gasping, struggling against the surprisingly powerful current. The pulse blasts and enraged roars of the hunting pack grew more distant with each stroke. Relief warred with the fresh surge of panic. Out of the frying pan, into the fire, he'd never exactly been a strong swimmer. The river, though, offered its own harsh form of survival. It carried him downstream, away from those hulking beasts. Each ragged breath was a small victory, but the current was relentless and the water numbingly cold. Sooner or later, his strength would give out. Just when the darkness began to creep into the edges of his vision, he spotted it. A fallen tree, its massive trunk snagged across the width of the river, creating a natural dam. With a final burst of desperate energy, Alex pulled himself onto its gnarled surface, shivering uncontrollably. From his sodden perch, he watched the tree line, searching for any sign of pursuit. Nothing moved, save the strange foliage swaying and dipping under the relentless pressure of the wind. He was alone, at least for now. Alex struggled to catch his breath. Exhaustion pulled at him like a physical weight. Every muscle in his body burned, and the cuts and bruises he'd sustained in the crash and subsequent scramble pulsed with fresh agony. Alive, yes, but utterly stranded. He fumbled in his sodden pockets and fished out a crushed ration bar, forcing himself to eat. He'd need every ounce of energy to see this through. Where the river would take him, he didn't know. But even the unknown was better than the certain death that waited on its banks. Hours passed, or was it days? Time blurred as Alex clung to the makeshift raft, propelled downstream by the tireless river. He drifted in and out of a painful, feverish doze, haunted by the growls of the brown monstrosities and the deafening crash of the Orion. Whenever he managed to open his eyes, it was the same relentless green canopy, the same unforgiving landscape. His strength waned and the chill seeped into his bones. Hunger gnawed at his insides as his meager rations ran out. Even if the river did carry signs of civilization, how much longer would he last? A break in the foliage finally drew his attention, a glint of something other than green and brown. A colossal structure, half submerged in the river, loomed in the distance. It was man-made, or at the very least, not crafted by nature. Its smooth, angular lines and metallic sheen were at odds with the tangled wilderness surrounding it. Salvation, or another deadly trap? Alex didn't have the luxury of choice. He coaxed his battered body to work, guiding his makeshift raft towards the structure by using a splintered branch as a makeshift oar. As he drew closer, the sheer scale of it became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a building. It was the wreckage of something enormous, a space vessel of unidentifiable origin. With the last of his waning strength, Alex breached his raft on a muddy bank near the wreckage. Something here must have pulled the Orion out of hyperspace, scrambled his comms. The possibility both terrified and exhilarated him. Answers must lie within, and maybe, just maybe, a ticket home. Alex found a partially collapsed entrance, where had once been a massive airlock now pried open by some unimaginable force. Dark recesses beckoned within, promising answers, but also the potential for a whole new horror show. It was a gamble, but after surviving this long on pure grit, he wasn't about to shy away. The interior of the vessel was a labyrinth of warped metal corridors and sparking, exposed wiring. The air hung heavy with the smell of ozone and something sickly sweet, decay. Alex navigated cautiously, pulse rifle ready in his damp hands. His boots slipped on the surfaces slick with condensation. The only sounds the echo of his own ragged breath and the faint hum of failing systems somewhere deeper within the vessel's guts. And then, voices, or something crudely approximating them. Hisses, clicks, and guttural snarls that sent a fresh wave of panic through him. He ducked into a side corridor, pressing his back against the cool metal. They were moving closer. From the echo of their footsteps, at least 3, maybe more, their forms finally emerged from the gloom. Tall, skeletal creatures with translucent skin and gleaming, oversized craniums. Their limbs ended in wickedly curved claws. They carried no discernible weapons. Their bodies themselves seemed designed to kill. Alex held his breath as they passed, their predatory gazes sweeping over his hiding spot, yet somehow missing it. Once the echoes faded, he staggered after them, his mind whirling. Those creatures, whatever they were, they'd brought him here. They'd brought down the Orion. But why? He found his answer soon enough. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. There, strapped to crude operating tables, were the other members of his crew, alive, at least for now, but clearly ravaged, mutilated. And above them, the skeletal creatures moved with mechanical precision, using tools that had no place in any medical textbook Alex had ever seen. A scream tore from Alex's throat before he could stop it. All pretense of stealth disappeared in the face of overwhelming shock and fury. He charged into the chamber, pulse rifle blazing. The skeletal things shrieked in surprise, their movements thrown into disarray. Energy bolts vaporized flesh and bone, but they were relentless, too many of them. Alex focused on liberating his crewmates, familiar faces now masks of terror and pain. One by one, he blasted their restraints, yelling at them to move, to get up, to fight. But these were broken men, victims of horror beyond understanding, and Alex, one soldier against an army, couldn't protect them all. His pulse rifle clicked empty. The last of his crew had been dragged off screaming into the darkness of the surrounding corridors. He tossed the useless weapon aside and drew the combat blade strapped to his thigh. It was brutal, primal, down to hand, the kind of combat he usually avoided. But today, there was no avoiding the bloody reality. One of the skeletal abominations lunged, its clicking shriek filling the chamber. Alex sidestepped, slashing. The blade bit deep, severing tendons and sinew, but the thing barely seemed to notice. It clawed back, raking its nails across his chest and sending a spray of blood across his vision. Pain exploded across his torso, fueling him as much as it hindered him. He ducked another swipe, his legs buckling from the earlier injury. He was losing this fight, and he knew it. But damn it, he wasn't going down without ripping out a few of their throats first. He roared, a primal battle cry that echoed through the steel tomb, and plunged his blade deep into the glowing cavity exposed amidst the attacker's mangled ribs. The creature finally collapsed with a wet gurgle. Alex wrenched his blade free and whirled to face the next challenger, only to be thrown backwards by an unseen force. He hit the ground, hard, gasping. One of the remaining creatures stood before him, its oversized cranium pulsating sickeningly, emanating an eerie luminescence. It had no weapon, yet Alex had been sent flying, some manner of telekinesis, perhaps. Great. Alex scrambled to his feet, a desperate plan forming in his mind. This thing, it was clearly in command. If he could kill it, the rest might falter, or at least be momentarily disoriented, buying him time to escape. With a bellow of defiance, he charged. The creature's pulsating skull flashed, and once again, Alex was hurled backwards. This time, he smashed into an exposed control panel, showering himself in sparks. Pain bloomed across his ribs, cracked, maybe broken, and his vision flickered. The odds were getting worse by the second. Desperate, Alex searched his surroundings. His eyes fell on a bundle of exposed wires torn loose from the damaged panel. Could he turn their weapon against them? It was a long shot, but he was fresh out of better options. With a speed born of desperation, Alex launched himself forward again. The creature pulsed in preparation for another telekinetic blast. But this time, Alex didn't aim for its fragile body. Instead, he lunged for the exposed wires, jamming his combat knife straight into sparking tendrils. Electricity surged through him, his senses overloading. He shrieked in agony but held on tight, his vision dimming to white-hot pain. And then it was over. The creature shrieked too, an awful screech that died into a gurgle as its body convulsed and slumped to the floor, taking Alex with it. He lay there, panting, the scent of burned flesh and ozone choking the air, his body buzzing with the aftermath of the surge. As his vision slowly cleared, he registered movement around him. The remaining skeletal creatures stood frozen, their movements hesitant, confused. He had done it. For a few precious moments, the balance of power shifted. Alex pushed himself up on trembling arms, his blade dripping crimson. They watched him with narrowed eyes, and for the first time, Alex saw a flicker of something like fear in those ghastly sockets. Without their leader, they were disorganized, vulnerable. Alex let out a guttural roar, the warrior finally eclipsing the man. This was his planet now. These were his beasts, and they would learn to fear him. The remaining creatures didn't attack. Instead, they slowly retreated back into the maze of corridors, their clicks and hisses fading into the darkness. Alex stood amidst the carnage, adrenaline and pain coursing through him in equal measure. He was battered, broken, and likely dying, but he had defied the odds. He had survived. Now came the daunting task of making sense of this situation. He stumbled through the vessel following the tracks of the skeletal things. They had technology, tools, and some semblance of structure. There had to be answers here. His head throbbed, exhaustion threatening to drag him into oblivion once again. Finally, he found their command center. Unlike the chaotic squalor elsewhere on the ship, here there was a chilling sense of order. Consoles flickered with alien script he couldn't decipher, and holographic projections mapped constellations he didn't recognize. But it was the central display that drew his eye, a crudely rendered image of Earth. A jolt of cold realization washed over him. These creatures, they weren't native to this feral planet. They were invaders just as he was. The thought of what they had planned for his homeworld filled him with renewed strength. No matter the cost, he had to find a way to warn his people. Alex began exploring the consoles, his fingers clumsily tracing over unidentifiable controls. A flicker of movement activated a side screen. Security logs? Pictorial, thankfully, and gruesomely clear. And there, at the center of it all, a massive hive-like chamber pulsing with grotesque fleshy tendrils. Something monstrous was stirring within the depths of this ruined vessel. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He wasn't fighting individual creatures. This was a war on a horrifying, unthinkable scale. And he, a single ranger with a broken body and a dwindling will to live, might be the only thing standing against the tide of a cosmic horror. The weight of the realization nearly buckled his knees. But something deep within him, a primal instinct forged in the fiery crucible of survival, refused to surrender. Alex gripped his blade until his knuckles turned white. He was a beast more savage than man. If these monsters wanted a war, he'd give them hell. Days blurred into weeks. Alex survived inside the wreckage. He salvaged what food and medical supplies he could, turning the consoles and control panels of the command center into a makeshift headquarters. He rested where he could, slept with his combat knife clenched in his fist, ever alert for the return of the skeletal horde. Pain became his constant companion. His injuries, festering and poorly treated, pulsed with a fiery beat in time to his fevered heart. But beneath the agony, he grew stronger in a different way. He studied the alien technology, the star charts, and the crude anatomical records. Knowledge was his new weapon. He hunted, at first clumsily, driven by hunger and necessity. Later, it evolved into grim strategy. The planet's deadly ecosystem became his brutal training ground. He learned to track the creatures, anticipate their movements, and turn their terrifying adaptations against them. The hunted was becoming the hunter. And always, the monstrous presence pulsed at the heart of the crashed vessel, a constant thrum vibrating under his skin. Alex knew the time for preparation was running thin. Whatever these creatures had planned, it would soon be unleashed upon this unsuspecting world. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to strike. One night, under the cover of torrential rain, Alex moved. The skeletal creatures were less vigilant in the downpour. He used their diminished senses against them. Ghosts in the shadows, striking with deadly precision. Each kill brought him closer to the throbbing, pulsating hive chamber. Finally, he stood before its glistening membrane, a barrier between him and the unspeakable horror within. The stench of decay was overwhelming. Alex readied the last of his scavenged explosives, a crude, desperate solution, but it was all he had. With a final roar, he charged, tossing the explosive bundle into the heart of the hive. The detonation was deafening, a burst of blinding light and searing heat. The shockwaves sent him sprawling. And then came the screams, thousands of them rising and falling in a cacophony of pain and fury. Alex scrambled away, the sounds of the collapsing hive a symphony of destruction echoing behind him. Limping and bloodied, he reached the edge of the ruined vessel. Dawn was breaking, casting the alien landscape in an eerie, blood-red glow. Survival, for now, had been achieved, but in its wake a grim truth dawned. This was his world now, this planet. This war, it was his forever. Years turned into a decade. The crashed alien vessel was no longer just a refuge, but the foundation of a rough-hewn outpost. Alex had salvaged what he could, jury-rigged defenses, and cobbled together a semblance of functionality from the skeletal remains of alien technology. His home wasn't pretty, but it was defensible. Survival had become a way of life. The creatures, the ones who survived the destruction of their hive, roamed the wilderness, fragmented and leaderless. Alex never stopped hunting them. Some days it was a necessity. They were as persistent as the brutal ecosystem that birthed them. Other days it was a grim sport. With each kill, he honored his fallen crew and reaffirmed his dominance over this hostile world. But he wasn't alone anymore. At first in whispers, then in desperate pleas carried by the wind, others had found their way to his hidden outpost. Survivors, crash-landed colonists, scouts from outposts on the fringes that had fallen eerily silent, even lone soldiers hailing from expeditions he'd never heard of. Ragtag and battle-scarred, their arrival was always the same. First disbelief, followed by relief, then the burning question in their haunted eyes, "How long have you been here?" Alex, hardened by the solitary survival, became an unwilling leader. He taught them what he had learned, how to fight, how to hunt, and crucially, how to make this savage world bend to their will. The outposts, under his grim guidance, transformed. Watchtowers rose, fields were cleared, guarded, harvested. They forged a wary society, not out of idealism, but out of the cold, sharp truth. Alone, they stood no chance. The transmissions he cobbled together were rudimentary, desperate cries in the cosmic darkness. Most went unanswered, but once, just once, a faint response crackled through the static. It wasn't a rescue, just acknowledgement, and a chilling warning. Earth knew. The war was far bigger than this blood-soaked planet. Alex stood atop his crude watchtower, scanning the horizon, his pulse rifle a familiar weight in his hands. The world had tried to consume him, break him. It had failed. The transformation was complete. No longer a lone ranger, he was the pack leader, his people an extension of his will to survive. They called him the Hellwalker, whispered his name like a prayer. It fit. The sun dipped below the jagged mountains, painting the sky in streaks of crimson. The distant roar of a predator echoed in the growing twilight. Tomorrow it would be hunted. Tomorrow there would be another fight, another day carved from the jaws of a monstrous world. Alex was ready. He was finally home.